You know how before computers were invented, computers were actual people whose job was to compute math equations? Well, before printers were invented, printers were also actual people. Their job was to operate the printing press. The printing press was invented well over 500 years ago, and the old school mechanical printing press style is pretty much obsolete now. But surprisingly, a lot of words associated with it are still very much alive in our vocabulary, many of which being used in the most unexpected ways. The printing press is the reason we have terms like the press, or press conference, or press release. The printing press was used for all types of paper printing back in the day, starting off with books and pamphlets. Later on, it became closely associated with the newspaper, and over time, the news itself became tied to the printing press. The journalists who wrote for and represented the newspapers became known as the press. And that's why, even though mediums have evolved over the centuries from radio to TV to internet, the idea of the press stuck around. Another example is the word stereotype. We know stereotype to mean a fixed, oversimplified, or often mistaken belief or generalization about a particular group of people or things. But the word stereotype actually came from the printing press. When the Gutenberg printing press was first created, which was the press that actually started the printing revolution, the presses were set up to hold a bunch of little blocks with letters on them, called type. The printers would have to arrange each of them letter by letter so that they could roll ink on them and print words on the paper. Not only was this time consuming, especially if they had to arrange the same text more than once, but it also required having a ton of type available for various letters. A few hundred years later, the stereotype process was finally invented to solve this issue. Stereo is the Greek word for solid, and a stereotype was a solid metal plate used to print often repeated text. To make it, they'd have to first arrange the letters as they normally would, but instead of adding ink and printing directly onto paper, they would print, or imprint for that matter, onto a softer material like paper mache. That would then dry and harden with the words imprinted on it, making a mold. Then they could pour molten metal into it and let that harden to make one solid printing plate that was known as a stereotype. And that was the word's main usage until around the early 1900s when it was repurposed to have the meaning that we know it to have today. But stereotypes weren't the only kind of solid printing plates. There were a few other methods for making these types of printing plates that could reproduce type or images repeatedly, and these plates as a whole were generally referred to as clichés. Cliché comes from the French verb meaning to click. At first, it was used to describe the clicking sound molten metal made as it was poured into the mold to create a printing plate. And then those plates themselves started being referred to as clichés. Though it wasn't used in the way we know it today until the early 1900s as well. For this next one, imagine you're in prison and you can only move within certain boundaries. If you cross that boundary, you get shot. That's where the word deadline came from a military prison in Georgia during the Civil War. The word was only referenced a few times during the war until it disappeared and came back in the 1920s, used by newspapers to describe the last possible date and time that something can go to print. After the press made it popular, we continued to use it in the way we do now. Speaking of which, there is a deadline for liking this video and subscribing to this channel, which is the end of the video. If you miss it, you're gonna have to watch another one of my videos. The next 5 words are still more closely related to modern day typing, the first of which being typewriter, which is of course a combo of the words type and writer. Just like the printing press, the typewriter has type bars and an ink pad within it. I do actually wonder why it wasn't called a type printer, but that's beside the point. These next 2 are one of my favorite fun facts, which is how we got the terms uppercase versus lowercase. I don't know if I made this up as a way to remember or we were actually taught this in school, but I always thought uppercase was called uppercase because it had to hit the upper line of the lines in the handwriting paper, and then lower had to hit the middle line, which isn't wrong, but the names actually came from the fact that the types would be stored in a case, and the capital letters would be stored in the uppercase because they're not used as often as the smaller letters, which were put in the lowercase for easier access. So we say upper and lowercase simply because type was stored in a case. Before the printing press, uppercase was called majuscules and lowercase was called minuscules. Another fun one is the word italics, which looks a lot like the word Italy because, as it turns out, the term italics originates from the Latin word italicus, meaning of or relating to Italy. We know it as the slanted font we use today because printers in Italy created a cursive-looking typeface inspired by handwriting and made it popular. So now we call it that. Speaking of typeface, I'm not sure if this is obvious, but typeface is what we usually consider font today. During the printing press days, typeface would be considered something like Times New Roman or Helvetica, though even those typefaces weren't created then. The font was a full set of typeface at a particular size. So technically a typeface would be Times New Roman and font would be Times New Roman at 12-point font. But in the digital world, we call typeface font and then specify the size. But more interestingly, the origins of font comes from the French word font. Hold on. I don't know if I said that right. Let me look that up.
Font.
Okay, it comes from the French word font, meaning a casting or something that has been melted and poured. So essentially, we turn the act of pouring molten metal into a word to describe how letters look on a digital screen. Did I miss any? Let us know in the comments. And if you like this video, check out this next one right here.